following reading is from Rays of the One Light, Weekly Commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Jesus Christ emphasized repeatedly the spirit, not the letter of the law. In chapter 5 of the Gospel of St. Matthew, he speaks of the sin of killing and of the legal punishment attendant on that sin, but says that more important than the act is the desire to kill or to do harm. He shows that the sin of harmful desire goes beyond merely wanting to kill. My message to you, he said, is this: whoever is angry with his brother without cause already stands condemned. Whoever contemptuously calls his brother a fool shall answer for it to the Supreme Council. And whoever calls his brother an outcast of God shall be in danger of hellfire. Brother here means any other human being. For all of us, in the highest sense, are brothers and sisters, children of our Father, Mother, God. The true self of one is the self of all. To hurt another is, even if one doesn't realize it, to hurt oneself. Swami Kriyananda in The Path recalls an episode in which the master, Paramahansa Yogananda, revealed his sense of identity even with the plants. One day, Kriyananda wrote, we were moving a delicate but rather heavy tropical plant into a position on the hillside. Our handling eventually was too rough, for Master cried out, "Be careful what you are doing. Can't you feel it's alive?" To wish death to anyone, to wish even harm to another creature, is to deny in oneself the reality of that divine life, of which all of us are manifestations. It is, in short, to deny the eternal truth, proclaimed by the Bhagavad Gita in the 2nd chapter. This self is never born, nor does it perish. Once existing, it cannot ever cease to be. It is birthless, eternal, changeless, ever itself. It is not slain when the body is slain. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Oh, oh, oh.
It is a joy to be with all of you today. It's really nice to be up here with Ananda, Seattle, Ananda, Washington. I'd like to read to you from Paramahansa Yogananda's book of prayer demands. No more shall my consciousness remain bottled in this little vessel of flesh, corked with ignorance. No more will I remain moving through the sea of cosmic consciousness, night and day, years, decades, and how many incarnations, so close, yet never able to contact thy sea. Through the bursting vibration of cosmic sound and the surging of thy holy name, I have removed the cork of ignorance which so long separated me from thee, though we lived together so closely. Now my body consciousness will meet thy all-surrounding, all-pervading consciousness. No longer will I walk heedlessly in thee, but never knowing and feeling thee. Thine image within me shall meet thy image everywhere. By releasing the I-ness in me, I will know that I am thou, and thou alone art the little egos in all of us. The opportunity we have coming into this human incarnation is really to come to who we really are. It's not really the sense of we're adding something, we're creating something different than we are. And this is apparent actually in yoga postures for some people, but not necessarily for a lot of people in the beginning when they come to a yoga class for Hatha Yoga. But really what's happening is less that people are becoming more flexible. They're just simply letting go of the tension. But it's a subtle but important distinction to keep in mind, because if we come at it from trying to gain and add, it's like the proverbial carrot on a stick. It's going to be out there. But if we at this moment in time, whether it's through the yoga stretches or every other part of our lives, come from that point of reference that we are this untouchable soul that simply gets covered up or simply added onto with layers of ego identification. And so, as we say, we miss the mark. We miss what's really going on. There's a story in a geography classroom where the teacher asks the student, Mary, points at the map and says, Mary, can you tell us, can you point out where North America is? And she goes up and does so, and the teacher says, that's correct. And then the teacher says, okay, class, who was the person that found America? And they all say, Mary. Well, we all sort of say Mary when we point towards the lesser truth. And because it was true that Mary did find America on the map. It wasn't an untruth. But like us in our own experience, we tend to, because of a lot of momentum of choosing the ego identification, we choose that lesser truth. But it still is true, and it's still pointing the way to us, towards where we want to go. It's pointing to the true us at the core of that. But it's interesting if you've studied or read about the Yoga Sutras, and probably the most primary part of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali that most of us are aware of is Ashtanga Yoga, which simply means the 8 limbs of yoga. And it describes the qualities in that way. And the first 2 are known as the yamas and niyamas. So these are qualities that we want to let go of and qualities that we want to observe more. But it's interesting, the deeper understanding of those qualities is that they're conditions. They're not so much the things we need to do or not do. But it's a subtle point here because, again, it's reflecting, it's expressing who indeed we are with our soul qualities at the heart of our own being. And so some of the yamas are probably familiar to all of us in this room, but things like non-violence, non-lying, non-avarice, those kind of things. And the niyamas are more stated in a positive way, things like cleanliness and contentment and so on. But it's not so much that we're adding these qualities to who we are. We're not really needing to become non-violent so much as to act in that sense of benevolence and compassion. But even with the positive things that we observe, it's stated that they're conditions that we're just allowing to become much more magnetically focused in our awareness. So something like cleanliness. We can approach cleanliness in a lot of different ways. And in the West, we tend to approach it more from the outside in, that we make sure everything is antiseptic or sterile. You know, the antibacterial soap industry has thrived on the paranoia of all of us really thinking we're going to get rid of every last bacteria in our household. And if you're aware of it, it actually has done the other. That antibacterial soaps have been problematic because they trick us into feeling safe when we should be more diligent in taking care of that cleanliness. So you can see that in the Western mind, that can be readily where we land with this. But of course, as this reading that Bhakti was reading from the Rays of the One Light, there really is this important emphasis of coming to the layers underneath that. And that phrase, coming to that, is the key. We're allowing ourselves to be more open in that flow of things, that we nurture that experience. And so we hearken back to who we are. Not the memory of the conscious mind, although that starts to weave itself into that whole package, but it's weaving really the superconscious mind. As Riemann led us through the affirmation, and every week we use the affirmation in Sunday service from the week from Affirmations for Self-Healing, we come from the overtly conscious level where we're expressing it with lot more dynamic outward expression. We can hear it. We all are in that energy of that affirmation being loud. And then what we do is, of course, bring it into that more subtle realm of more interiorized. It's still outward, but it's more soft. It's an interiorizing process, or more rightly said, an interiorizing direction. And then he led us into that whisper, bringing it even deeper within in that experience. And then the final repetition isn't so much even a repetition, as Riemann guided us to focus that awareness at the kudasta, the spiritual eye, and to feel that we're in the experience of the superconscious. So we're really shifting from doing it into being it. And that's what the spiritual path really entails for all of us, that we are going to work on nonviolence, aren't we? We're going to take steps immediate in our lives to see that we make that an active direction for us from the conscious state that we're in. But what starts to unfold is that we start to remember, we start to feel, we start to sense that that is our reality, not something we're moving towards, something we're allowing to express, like a blossom coming out more. Or the beautiful imagery that's used, and in one of Yogananda's Whispers from Eternity, the idea of the caterpillar, going into the cocoon, and then the chrysalis evolves from that, and then the chrysalis breaks through the confinement of the cocoon and flies away as a butterfly. Well, that's really what happens for us, is that we have woven this encasement of the cocoon of ego identification and all that goes with that. It creates this separation from the life that is just always there in an expressive way around us. But we start to remember, we start to engage in the natural development of the soul coming to the forefront. And that's really what happens in the cocoon. That chrysalis starts to happen. So the wings start to happen within the confines of the cocoon. And there it is. And suddenly it bursts out into that free-flying butterfly. Well, I remember hearing about this story where some children, seeing the struggling part of that chrysalis trying to come out of the cocoon, thought, let's help it along. And so they carefully made an incision in the cocoon for that chrysalis to come out. But of course what happened, it was too soon. And the butterfly didn't survive. It didn't go through that struggling phase of really knowing who it was to become that free-flying butterfly. But that's very true for us. We don't want the challenges in our lives to just be taken care of. And that isn't what the divine will do for us. It will allow us to participate, to engage, to be fully active in the process of shifting from the challenge being something, compacting us into being that which is the opportunity to open up. But isn't that really what we're doing on the spiritual journey? Is that we're trying to find the ways to open up more, to see ourselves not separate from one another, not separate from the world we live in, but indeed an expression in our own unique way in that beautiful symphony of all the different expressions that we come to. The idea that we can perceive God everywhere, in everything, in everyone, allows then God to know that we're ready to have that deeper, fulfilling divine experience. But it does get tricky, because we are, again, sometimes in the momentum of the default of being pulled into the limited identification rather than that expansive expression. There's a wonderful book, I think probably a number of you people have read it, but it's an inspiring book that I've read, and some of us many times, called The Hiding Place by a woman named Corey Ten Boom. Interesting last name, Ten Boom. I thought it's kind of explosive. But it's called The Hiding Place because the story takes place at the beginning of World War II, where Corrie and her sister Betsy and their father lived in the Netherlands. Was it Amsterdam, Rotterdam? I can't remember. Haarlem. And the reason why it's called The Hiding Place is that they would hide Jewish residents of the Netherlands and protect them from the persecution that the Nazis at that time were pursuing with the Jews and taking them away to concentration camps. Well, someone betrayed the family and let the Nazis know that they had this hiding place. So they were arrested and taken off to a concentration camp. And there's numerous inspiring stories from the book, and I'd highly recommend, if you haven't read it, or if you've read it, read it again. If you haven't read it, for sure read it. But there's one story where, well, in this camp, there were very harsh conditions. And even for minor infractions, the prisoners were harshly disciplined, beaten. And one time this happened, and all the other prisoners were forced to observe this as a real point of reference, that if you do anything wrong, you too will be punished brutally. And the guards were beating several of these women prisoners. And Betsy was standing beside her sister Corrie. And Betsy said, just softly to her sister, "We need to pray for them." And Corrie thought, well, but of course. And Betsy said, "I meant the guards." And that sense of that coming naturally from her care, her compassion, wasn't condoning anything in the behavior, but trying to feed the soul that was there, trapped, captured within this expression that was brutal and harsh to other human beings. To naturally, Betsy came to that understanding that that was needed. To pray, of course, for those that were being brutally disciplined, but to have that sense of openness and connectedness to those that were the punishers, to, again, to feel the blessing going to the soul, to remember its true nature, to be that chrysalis that would come out of the cocoon of pain and of contraction and of negativity, to really burst out of that. Well, the other story that I'm reminded of so succinctly and vividly from The Hiding Place is that when Betsy died in the concentration camp, as did their father, but Corrie survived. And the inspiration that she touched on in touching the spiritual essence of who she was in the experience caused her to tour and talk about the blessing of Jesus in her life and to convey that to others. So she toured frequently, and she wrote the book, The Hiding Place, among other books. But at one point, it was in Germany that she was giving this talk. And always afterwards, she invited people to come up and just to, like we do at the end of service, to exchange, handshake or a hug or something like that. And Corrie felt that was as important as the presentation talking about things, because people wanted to feel, not just hear, that energy. And at one point, Corrie looked up, and half a dozen people in the line down, she recognized one of the guards from her concentration camp. And now, at this point in her lectures, when she was touring, her emphasis was about compassion and forgiveness. And suddenly this stark reality of that was coming right in front of her. And she saw this man, and she said, "I cannot greet this man with all honesty." The pain, just that stark pain, was so vivid and vibrant in every cell as she saw this man coming. And then as he came up, he came up in tears, saying, "You have relieved me of this burden that I've carried." And she said at that point, she hugged him and greeted him. But you can see how challenging it is in our lives, the momentum that we have. Sometimes the reactions to life in the depth of what happens can seemingly scar us and turn us away from having that openness of the heart. The point isn't that we have to leap across this huge chasm to do something that isn't real for us in this moment. The point is to move in that direction, to offer ourselves more towards where we're going, to our true self. Because I think our culture is so readily the either-or choices, that it's good or bad, or I'm this and I can't do that. It's like what we find in teaching meditation, and find people after meditating for a while, they say, well, I just don't have the time to meditate, so I don't meditate. Well, yeah, you won't if you have that attitude. You simply won't. But we don't have to say, well, I can't meditate for 45 minutes, so I won't meditate. We can say, hey, I've got 5 minutes. I can meditate. And typically, if you've done this, you know that that 5 minutes naturally grows into more time. And you just find then the vibrancy of your own connectedness to this deeper spiritual magnetism. It's like the choice is to move with our awareness, our consciousness, and our openness in the right direction. And then the things will happen to us that nurture more of that. And it's the way that we're engineered. You know, the more that we, for instance, meditate and contemplate the divine, the more the divine becomes real to us. It's how the brain is structured. The more that we start to have care and concern for others, the more that concern and compassion, like Betsy, as opposed to Corey in the story in the concentration camp, it naturally came to her to pray for those guards. So our natural being starts to become more evident and expressive in every part of our lives. It's no longer that we're spiritual here, but the real world has to be dealt with. What is the real world? The more that we become enraptured in the sense of the divine grace, the more that we're able to filter that into what seemingly is this material world that's not as connected with that. That our natural tendency is to be in prayer. You know, our prayers start to become the natural internal dialogue, not only with God, but with the world around us. That natural sense that we're radiating out a blessing. You know, more like the image of a lighthouse, that the lighthouse just naturally shines that light. It isn't trying to say, is there a boat there? Do I need to light, it up? It's just there, moving that light around and allowing then maybe that boat that's going to hit that reef to pick up the signal and realize, maybe I need to change my course. But it's a natural evolution on our part. And so our intentions of moving towards more of the divine in whatever way it's unique to us, then our deeds don't become something special, but just a natural extension of that connection with the divine. But the real special part of this is, when I said the deeds aren't special, when we grow in this way, every deed is special because it's saturated with the divine presence. Because we have remembered and integrated that we are the divine foremost. Whatever happens through our personality, these bodies that seem to fall apart at times, our mental awareness, our thoughts, our emotions, they become animated, they become enlivened, where that the naturalness of who we are nurtures not only ourselves, but this world around us. And so to paraphrase another verse in the Bhagavad Gita, with Krishna speaking to Arjuna. So Krishna speaking to each one of us. He says, those that perceive me in everything and everywhere, then I perceive myself in them, and they are drawn to me to become that perfect expression to touch many others, to remind others of their own divinity, and to be in that complete embrace of pure love, pure joy, the bliss of God. Let's take a moment to meditate.